Oh, happy Friday, and happy fall equinox. It's the first day of fall. This is my favorite season ever. So I'm super psyched for fall. So welcome today as a Friday Live where I jump on and we jam about a topic that is also over on my blog this week. So if you want to catch any of that out, I dropped a link for you so you can always catch the full blog post as well as I have some free gifts over there for you. And today is all about self-care gone wrong. Those times that we are engaging in self-care, but it's really self-sabotage in disguise. So have you ever gone into a really fancy store and you promise yourself you're just going to browse, and you wander into the store, and before you know it, you've whipped out your credit card, you've bought yourself this really awesome purchase, and when you walk out feeling a little guilty, but you tell yourself, I deserve it, and you're just filled with that endorphin rush and you're feeling so great? Or maybe you've been eating clean all week and you treat yourself to a really sugary dessert. Or you spend a whole day just sleeping in and lounging around, telling yourself that you're recharging, but really what you've done is you've missed an important deadline on some work that you've either owed someone or that you've promised yourself that you would do. If you've ever engaged in any of these activities or these sound familiar to you, you're not alone. This is something I have definitely done. This is something that's come up a lot with my private clients recently. And this is when self-care is really acting as self-sabotage. So self-care is a tricky one because we all need to practice in self-care. Self-care is so important. Without engaging in self-care, we can become very burnt out. We can create some really mindless drivel. We can just be existing on fumes. So self-care is something we need. As that saying goes, we can't pour from an empty cup. So self-care, yes, so important. But today is not about the virtues of self-care. I think most of us have heard about self-care. I think most of us, if you haven't, you just scroll on Instagram and you can see hashtag self-care all day long. I think where self-care can get us into a little bit of hot water, can get a little tricky, is those times that we say that we're practicing self-care. We're using self-care as an excuse. Hey, whoever just joined, we're talking about those times that we are engaging in self-care, or we're claiming that we're practicing self-care, but that self-care is really a form of self-sabotage. So like so many things, self-care really requires that intention and clarity for it to be a positive practice. Otherwise, it can very quickly become a form of self-sabotage that we just tie up in a pretty bow and call something else. So what does this look like? So there's a couple, I think we'll call them factors or pieces here that tie in that turn self-care into self-sabotage. So these are usually actions that start off feeling really good in the moment. So for example, hanging out with friends instead of going on that long run you promised yourself. Hanging out with friends feels really good. They also often have the added element that the action you're behaving or practicing on its own, when it stands on its own, very well could be deemed self-care. So in that example, hanging out with my friends is definitely something that fills my tank and could be considered self-care. The other thing that these masquerading self-sabotagers have is that they are all causing us to directly step back from our bigger goals, our bigger vision, our larger purpose. So in that same example, if my bigger goal is to be healthy and take care of myself, or to bump up my fitness, that action is taking me away from that bigger goal. With that shopping example we had at the beginning, and that's a great example because shopping, buying ourselves a treat, stands alone. When that stands alone, that could be considered a form of self-care. There are definitely times that treating ourselves to something could be considered self-care. But if we have this larger goal of, say, saving money or wanting to invest our money or wanting to get out of debt, this behavior suddenly turns into self-sabotage because it is causing us to directly take a step backwards or step away from what we want to do, that larger goal or vision we have. Does that make sense? If you have any questions, or if anyone's joining me, you can drop a note below. And if you have any thoughts about that, I'd love to hear from you. So where does this come from? Why do we do this? Why do we do things that can actually be self-sabotage? I think, of course, sometimes it can be a fear of failure, a fear of success, can be a low self-esteem, lack of confidence, lack of wanting to be seen. There is of course, those elements that can come into play, and definitely something to look at. I think also sometimes it can be a very human response to something that doesn't feel so great. So as humans, we are all wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. That is a very base human trait that we have. So we're wired to, again, seek that pleasure and avoid pain. So when we're in the middle of growth, or when we are striving towards a goal, oftentimes that can be a little uncomfortable, that can feel a little painful. It doesn't always feel so great. And so it's a very normal human reaction to want to reach for something that does feel pleasurable, or to do something that does feel pleasurable, and to take us out of that pain. So it's very, very normal and human. We're wired that way. So it doesn't have to mean that something's wrong with you. It can just be a very human response. Now, what do we do about this? So y'all are going to hate me because I'm always talking about this, but I really think this, like so many things, starts with that first step of awareness. Hey, who's joining? We're talking about self-care gone wrong, when self-care turns into self-sabotage. And I'm talking right now about some ways to shift out of that. So what do? We want to start with that, again, that awareness and that clarity. We want to upgrade our mindset here. So if you find yourself, you're doing something that you're calling self-care, you're labeling as self-care, but suddenly you've got that wash of guilt, that feeling of dread, that like icky feeling that shouldn't come with it, check in with yourself. Could it be possible that you're actually self-sabotaging yourself? And if so, what's up? Check in. What's going on? Why is this happening? Sometimes there is something deeper we need to dig into, and sometimes it is just that very surface, we're trying to avoid that feeling of pain. So you want to check in with that. Then really want to be kind to yourself and really be compassionate with yourself. Our minds do not do well when we bully or beat up on ourselves. Remind yourself that you're having a very human response to something that most likely is feeling uncomfortable and painful to you. So again, that compassion goes a really long way. And then don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Self-care is important. So it might be that you really are in some need of that self-care, and you might really be in need of some refueling and some pleasure and some kindness. So find another form of self-care that supports your bigger goals and that supports your larger dreams. Hey, who's joining? Say hello. We're talking about self-care gone wrong. That is a form of self-sabotage, and we're talking about how to shift out of it. So again, we want to, what was I just saying? Oh yeah, we want to find a form of self-care that actually supports our larger goals, that supports our bigger purpose, that supports our larger vision. And then additionally, as an added step, if you find that you are behaving in these self-sabotagers as a way to avoid something that doesn't feel so great, or that maybe is a little painful or uncomfortable, see if there's a way you can make that a little more enjoyable. See if there is a way you can add that layer of fun or pleasure to it. So those are some ways very easily to shift out of that. Again, it's all about that awareness. Check in with yourself. Check in with, could you be self-sabotaging? And if so, what's up? Again, be kind to yourself, and then see if you can find a form of self-care that really does support those larger goals and that bigger vision of yours. And then finally, as a note and as a thought here, and I think this is a hard one for all of us to hear, not doing what feels good in the moment, and sometimes doing that task we don't want to do, sometimes those are actually the biggest ways we can take care of ourselves and the biggest ways we can show ourselves self-care. Not all forms of self-care feel amazing or pleasurable in the moment. So I think that's something that's important to remember. Sometimes doing that thing we don't want to do, sometimes doing that thing that doesn't feel so great actually is a form of self-care. So I'd love to hear from anyone. Oh, someone else joined. Hello. I'd love to hear from anyone else who's watching. Have you ever done a form of self-care and it turns out it really is a form of self-sabotage that is pulling you away from those bigger goals or that bigger vision or those dreams of yours? Love to hear from you. Share below. And I will be back next week with a new topic for you. In the meantime, have a beautiful, beautiful Friday. Have a happy weekend. Happy fall. It's fall. And I am wishing you your version of success. Lots of love.